There is so much discussion on whether the resurrection is pre, mid, or post-tribulation that the really important question, will all Christians be in that resurrection, is forgotten. Who is going to be resurrected? At what point during the day of the Lord the resurrection occurs will be answered, and we will see why there has been so much confusion on this issue. First, though, we're going to look at the who question. In the early chapters of Revelation, in his message to the churches, Christ clearly spelt out that not all Christians would make it to the wedding. Nominal Christians, part-time Christians, those who are playing at or worse, masquerading as being true Christians and church leaders, are totally excluded from this resurrection. The point is, the first resurrection is not the only one. And so for those that did not make it, this is not a salvation issue. God in his mercy leaves the door open to many, many others for an eternal future at later stages. The first resurrection is a very special one. It will determine who will be selected for the positions as kings and priests in the kingdom Christ is coming back to establish. This is a very high calling, as Paul points out. Yet it is still open to anyone complying with the scriptural requirements. There is a qualifying factor for this resurrection. Even Paul raises the issue about having done enough to guarantee being in what he refers to as the better resurrection. He never presumes to have made it. Peter adds, give diligence to make your calling and election sure. It's not a foregone conclusion. Finally, when it comes to who will enter into the wedding, the parable of the wise and foolish virgins points out that many in the church will not make it if they have not made the necessary preparation. Even for those having done wonderful works in the name of the Lord, there is no guarantee. I never knew you, Christ will say to some of them. For those in the church, at the time Christ returns, an extra dimension is present. Understanding the details of the day of the Lord is essential if you are to avoid all the pitfalls that are ahead. Paul says we should have a perfect understanding of certain details. Now let's get back to the when part of the resurrection. The sixth seal in Revelation chapter 6 gives a definitive description with specific detail of what makes up this startling series of events. And in Matthew 24, starting in verse 29, there is a list of the identical same events. The Matthew account is the same sixth seal. However, Matthew 24 goes a little further by adding that at the time the spectacular sights are being seen by everyone on earth, the angels gather the elect from the four corners of the heavens, i.e., the resurrection takes place at the sixth seal. If it really is that simple, if the resurrection takes place at the sixth seal, as it plainly seems to say, where has all the confusion come from? It simply boils down to this. In Matthew 24:29, in describing the sixth seal, it starts off the passage by saying, immediately after the tribulation of those days. This is immediately presumed by most, if not all, to be after the Great Tribulation. And yet the Great Tribulation is universally accepted as taking place during the seventh seal. So a contradiction, therefore, would be apparent, hence the confusion. The answer is the tribulation of those days is referring to the previous seals, to the sixth seal, in particular seals 2, 3 and 4, which was the world war that claimed a quarter of the world's population from the fighting and the subsequent disease and starvation. In Mark 13, this all becomes a little clearer when it records the same events, but says, in those days, after that tribulation, which indicates another one to follow, which is the Great Tribulation. We can also now fill in some more detail on our timeline. What is seen in the sky that so terrifies the entire world is the Sea of Glass. It's mentioned several times in the Bible. The Sea of Glass is God's throne. The size of it, mentioned towards the end of Revelation, is thousands of miles in dimension. No wonder the world is so terrified when it suddenly becomes visible. The sixth seal is one of the busiest periods of the end time. Many other events are almost simultaneously occurring. One of them is the mysterious abomination of desolation, which will be the subject of our next episode. The beast says he is God, and the world believes him. Find out why in our next episode.